Hello, my name is Jacob. I am a Norse Pagan. And today I want to talk about books. And you might be wondering, why do I talk about books so much? And it's because they are so important to everyone's path in this faith. Because research and gaining knowledge and seeking wisdom are so crucial to exploring our gods and exploring our histories. Because there isn't one book, there isn't a Bible of this faith. Now, some might call the Poetic Edda that, but it's not. And there's so many sources you need to dig into. And some of those sources I just got for the first time in physical form. One of those is Agricola and Germania by Tacitus, and the other is the Sagas of the Icelanders. Most importantly in here is the Egil Saga or Eagle Saga. And as you can tell, this book is huge. I'm getting through it. I'm reading a little bit every single night, but it's a lot denser than Germania. But in this video, I want to tell you why every single Norse pagan should read Germania by Tacitus. Now, a little bit of backstory before we get into it. So Tacitus was born in 56 CE in Rome, and he died in 120 CE. Germania was written in 98 CE, so about midway through his life. And it's broken up into roughly 8 sections and or chapters, ranging from general knowledge of the Germanic people to their land layout, what they look like, their private customs, their public customs, some of their religious customs, and a lot on the different people groups of Germania, which is less crucial to me. Like the last 10 pages are all the different people groups of Germania. And that's interesting to know, but doesn't really dive into any religious things. So obviously, with this channel, we're diving in and really looking for how the people were, how the Germanic people of the pre-Viking age acted and before Christianization. Because that's something to consider, is the fact that there were people in Scandinavia at this time. When this was written, there was people in Scandinavia. There was people worshiping the Old Norse gods. But the Germanic people are cousins, brothers, and sisters, are very close relatives to the Nordic people. So reading about the Germanic faith, reading about the Germanic gods is just as important, because it's the root of everything. It's the root of our faith. And we're very close in almost everything. So reading Germania is really important to understanding a lot of the pre-Christian values, especially in the Germanic region. Now, breaking right into it, again, it's 57 pages long. I could probably do a video where I just read this to you, but that would be like an hour. I really do think that you should really pick up a copy. They're really cheap. I got mine off Amazon for like 10 bucks. But diving into it, let's just go ahead and read like the first page, so to speak, that was really important to me. And on my note cards I wrote like what I'm going to read, and I kept adding more, so I may end up just reading this whole thing. But one of the things that I really loved is the early depiction of the Germanic people. I think there's this idea in our mind, especially in modern media, that Germanic and Nordic people are blonde-haired, blue-eyed, in this pristine, doll-like form. But the way they're described in Germania is by as wild blue eyes, reddish hair, and huge frame that excel only in violent effort. And I really like this. Germania is really good because it reads so good. Even reading the Poetic Edda, which is newer than Germania, is kind of a slog. I think we all experience that, especially some of the other poems, the lesser known poems, are kind of boring. And honestly, this is a really interesting read. I really like the language he uses describing why they look this way. So this is how he says it. They have no corresponding power to endure hard work and exertion, and little capacity to bear thirst and heat, but their climate and soil have taught them to bear cold and hunger. And it just, I don't know, it's got a slightly dark romantic idea behind it. One thing that is really focused on within Germania is the tactical aspect of fighting the Germanic people, which is really entertaining to listen to learn that this ferocity, that this dark energy and this sense of honor were all wrapped up into the Germanic warriors. One of the things that I really love is this description of Baratus. It's a term used when the Germanic people were fighting or initiating combat. They would put their shields in front of their faces, and they would just start at a low scream and start just roaring into the shield, and then everyone together would slowly raise up the screams and the yells, and right before they fight they release it and they charge, and it's described as being terrifying, and harsh, and it's just like it absolutely destroyed the confidence of the legions. And that's just really interesting because we know that the legions in Rome eventually failed at taking Germany. They failed at taking the heartland of his faith, and a lot of it is because of the ferocity of the warriors and how they would not stop and how they would not quit. And the legions just didn't want to fight them. They didn't want to suffer these huge casualties and this mental attack by these warriors. The next section I've highlighted specifically talks about leaders and what they prized, what the Germanic people prized in looking for leaders. And again, this is like page 3, and you can see how much I highlighted on this one. Oh my gosh, there's so much good stuff in here. I'm going to read directly from this. They choose their kings for their noble birth, their leaders for their valor, but even the power of the kings is not absolute or arbitrary. As for the leaders, it is their example rather than their authority that wins them special admiration, their energy, their distinction, or their presence in the front line. Moreover, no one is allowed to punish, to fetter, or even to flog except the priest, and not as punishment or of the leader's orders, but as though in obedience to the God who they believe presides over battle. And they also carry in a fray figures and emblems taken from their sacred groves. Another thing it mentions is a man's dearest possessions are close at hand. He can hear nearby the laments of his women and the wails of his children. They are the witness the man reverenced most. The men take their wounds to their mothers and wives who are not afraid of counting and examining the blows and bring food and encouragement to those fighting. Tradition has it that armies wavering and even on the point of collapse have been restored by the steadfast pleas of the women. More than this, they believe that there resides in women something holy and prophetic. They do not scorn their advice or disregard their replies. And of course, this is a really uplifting thought because obviously in the older world, we hear a lot of this separation of men and women, and while they're a lot of the times it's more positive on the masculine side of things, the fact that the Romans are having this critique of how the women are actually lifted up and respected for being spiritual advisors, and their advice is actually adhered to and listened to, is really cool. And actually there's a later section that talks about marriage, and how the fact that they were absolutely appalled by the fact that the Germanic men only took one wife, and they were like, this monogamy, because that was so rare, and seems like love was actually something that was important to them. So as we know, in like medieval times, it was very common for a very young girl to marry a much older man to achieve power, a power play and or a dowry. So here in Germanic culture, it says maidens are not rushed into marriage. As old and full grown as the men, they match their mates in age and strength, and their children reflect the might of their parents. That's really cool. That's awesome. The fact that 2,000 years ago, their social structure was more similar to ours and what we're trying to achieve 2,000 years later. It's so cool. You need to get this book. It's just so interesting. So on to the religious side of things. So one note when you're actually reading this is the gods are not referred to by their Nordic names or their Germanic names. They're referred to by their Roman equivalents. And that's just a writing style. I don't quite understand it. So when it says, as for the gods, they worship Mercury above all, and consider it proper to win his favor on certain days, even by human sacrifices. Hercules and Mars they appease with the beast normally allowed. And then it does go into like cults. That was a big Roman thing, is calling things cults. Like there was like a cult of Isis. I can't really dive into that, but again, there's so much you can explore through this reading. And so the tie-in is Mercury is Odin, Hercules is Thor, and Mars is Tyr. So reading that in the Norse context or the Germanic context, as for the gods, they worship Odin above all and consider it proper to win his favor on certain days, even by human sacrifice. Thor and Tyr they appease with beasts that are normally allowed. And backtracking a little bit, the very beginning of one of their the paragraphs here, it's said in the very earlier sections that Hercules too is said to have visited them, and they sing his praises before those of other heroes on their way into battle. So, it's like they're singing about Thor, they're worshiping Thor, yeah, it's just really cool that, you know, we actually have a source that's talking about how they worshipped. Within this section, it also talks about divination and how divination was important to them. And this is a very famous quote or line. A lot of people refer to this when we talk about rune divination, because it talks about the casting of lots. They have the highest regard for it. They also talk about listening to the cries of birds before going into battle. So these lots they describe are, they break them off of a branch of a fruit tree and slice it into strips. They mark these by certain signs and throw them as random onto a white cloth. So they might not be the runes we know. They could be. It's definitely some kind of, you know, sacred symbolism. But the idea of them slicing up, you know, tree branches into something and then carving into them, it sounds like runes. And this is where we get a big hint of our ancient rune usage. You know, at first I thought this video was going to run really short, but I really can't stop talking about this book. If you've learned anything in this video so far, it's that you should buy this book. I'm going to read a little bit more into it, but you can just stop this video at this point, go to Amazon, go to a bookstore's website, and just buy it and read it. It's so good. I mean, I was giddy with how much information that was in this, and I'm so glad it's part of my collection now. But these are just more fun facts. If you just want to listen to me say them, please do. Otherwise, just buy this book. So this is an interesting thing. I remember reading this in Myths and Symbols in Pagan Europe. It's the fact that the Germanic people count not by days like us, but by nights. It is by nights that they have fixed dates and make appointments. Night is thought to usher in the day. It is a defect of their it is a defect of their freedom that they do not gather at once or in obedience to orders. And that's one of the things that their Tacitus is really critical on, maybe a little bit respectful of, is the fact that they're free men. And he even refers to them as free men at some point, and free people. And the fact that they are not burdened by society and, you know, structure. It even mentions that they are don't like living in towns, that they're not very big in cities, that they prefer having their own land, they prefer having their own house, and then they gather in halls and, you know, feasting areas and celebrate. There's actually a really large section on feasting and how much they prize celebration. And of course, we're looking at our modern age, and what do we want? We want to return to something that is more community-based. We want our own land, but we want strong communities. We want to feast, we want to drink. We probably want to fight, and we want to honor our gods, and we want to live with honor. And we really want to return to a different structure of, you know, socialness. You know, everyone is equal. Everyone has a voice. Everyone has strength. You know, and everyone's judged based on their value. And it's really cool to see that 2,000 years ago, this existed at some point. And the fact that we're trying to get back to it is really heartwarming, and it really, you know, just drives my fire. So something that I'm actually reading in Egil Saga as well is the idea of feasts being your payment in a way. So, you know, lords, leaders, kings, if you may, they would throw feasts to pay their men. As for feasts, they are as abundant and homely fare, and they count simply as pay. And it also mentions when they're not engaged in warfare, they spend little time hunting and more in idling, devoting themselves to sleep and gluttony. There is a small section I'll read to you here. It talks about how they dress. It's a little odd. So universally dressed as a short cloak, fastened with a brooch, or failing that, a thorn. Wearing no garments but this, they pass whole days by the hearth fire. The richest are distinguished by the clothing that is not loose and flowing, but tight and showing the shape of every limb. They also wear the pelts of wild animals. So it's a weird mental picture that they would wear cloaks and then barely anything else. If anything, it's more intimidating in battle, because it talks about soldiers in here, it talks about swords and spears, it talks about battle formations. Just buy this book. You know, there's just so much information in here. So about page 47 is where I kind of lost focus and where I actually stopped highlighting to, because this one, it drives into the relationship and the movement of people groups. You might find that interesting, but it really starts losing the facts and the details we care about. But 47 pages, 47 good, solid, filled with information, rich pages await you in Germania by Tacitus. And I really think you would benefit yourself from you know, reading, buying this book, keeping a copy of this book. I know it's going to be something I refer to, you know, many times, and the fact that you can read it in an hour is a really, really good thing and really impressive. But folk, until next time, go out, seek more wisdom, buy more books, read Germania, and until the hall, Skull.